Yeah, no, that's fine. Well, let's talk. Like I said, I know a little bit about before, but I want to sort of start as if I haven't visited with you before, and you sort of remind me of things. Take me back to where you. I'm going to put this. Just I'm going to put this right here so that I can just hear you talk, and you just sit back in the chair, and that'll be fun.
Think about it.
Yeah. Talk about just sort of where did you grow up and your family, and how you got started, and eventually how you got into military service.
I grew up in Turbiville, Ohio.
Right.
And I went into nurses training in Cleveland, Ohio, at St. Vincent's Charity Hospital.
Right.
And after that, I went to West Virginia, where my twin was with her husband, and lived with them for a while and did private duty. And then I became superintendent of nurses at one of the schools there. And then I decided I wanted to go into the Army.
Right.
And my father...
What year would this have been now?
41, 42.
Okay.
Somewhere in there, 42.
42, okay.
Yeah.
So we were already involved in the war?
Yes.
Okay.
So I decided that I wanted to go into the Army, and my father absolutely became ballistic about it. And so I promised him I would wait a year.
Right.
And I did. So I became superintendent of nurses at one of the hospitals there, which I liked and I didn't like. I mean, it was something I was doing, but it wasn't what I really wanted to do.
Right.
So therefore, after I got through with that, I went to Columbus, Ohio to enlist into the Army. And actually, they didn't want me. Well, for the very simple reason I had flat feet. Yeah, well, that's true. I had flat feet, and I also had an eyesight deficiency. And they put me on what they call limited service.
I see.
And I looked at them, and he looked at me, and I said, well, within a year I'm going to be overseas. And he said, I don't think so. And I said, don't bet with me.
He didn't know who he was dealing with.
That's right. And so I was assigned to Fletcher General Hospital in Cambridge, Ohio, which I absolutely hated with a passion. I just couldn't wait to get out of there. And so let's say I bent rules. And because of this, the nurses that was in charge of us put me on a group that was going to Camp Kilmer for an evacuation hospital, which is where I wanted to go to begin with.
Right.
And so sometimes people talk about doing things, and I didn't exactly break rules. I just sort of bent them. I mean, there were things that you could do and things that you couldn't do, but I didn't. But we had an officers club, and officers could go to the club. Well, I worked on a ward that had officers that were injured in Alaska. And so I said, gee, they're officers, why can't I invite them to the club? Which I did.
Right.
And they got all dressed up and we went to the club. And the next morning I got invited to the superintendent of nurses, and she said, why did you do this? I said, I didn't do anything wrong. I said, they were officers. I said, why can't they go to the officers club? And he said, well, that didn't include patients. I said, that's not what it reads. It says officers club. It doesn't say you can't be in the hospital and go. And she didn't like, because I told her that they could go.
Right.
Anyway, we had quite a few difficulties because I would sort of, as I said, bend rules. And I wasn't breaking rules. I just thought that if that applied to one, it could apply to others.
Exactly.
And so anyway, she put me on this group that were going to Camp Kilmer, and that's where I really was pushing to go anyway.
You were trying to get yourself in trouble so you could go.
That's right. And we got assigned to the 100th Evacuation Hospital.
Right.
And we set sail February the 14th, because it was Valentine's Day, and I remember that distinctly. And we landed in we landed in
Blackpool?
No. Below that's southern England. Anyway, we landed in southern England, and from there we were assigned to Fleetwood, England.
Okay.
And
This is February of 43?
44?
44?
43?
43.
43. It had to
43,
be,
okay.
43.
Okay.
And we went to Fleetwood, and our position there was we were to get ready to go into France. So we did bandages, and we did first aid, and we did a lot of things that we were supposed to do. And we had foot lockers that we were to fill with things that we would need, and we didn't have time to say, well, we have to go somewhere to get them. We had to have them on hand.
Right.
And this is what we did for the time being. And we were assigned roommates, which I wasn't particularly happy about. I was assigned a roommate, which I was very unhappy about, because she was an alcoholic. And I tried every which way to not have her drink, but you can't. An alcoholic's an alcoholic. They're going to find a way to do it.
Sure.
And we were allowed to go away on weekends. I mean, if we asked our chief of nurse if we could take a leave and go away. So I spent every weekend going somewhere in England. I would get on the train, and I wouldn't care where it would go. I would just go somewhere to see England. And I spent most of my weekends visiting English families that invited me for lunch and dinner.
How about that?
On the train.
Yeah.
And they would ask where I was going, and I said, well, I didn't know. I was just going to go somewhere. And they would invite me to dinner.
I'll be darned.
So I met a lot of English people.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of girls or nurses that I was with never left the base.
Right.
And they would say, where are you going? And I said, I don't know. I'm just going to go. I said, this is my opportunity to see England. I'm going to go.
Right.
And they just sort of stayed put, and I'm going, what a waste.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And so we got ready to go overseas, and we went down to Bournemouth to get on a boat to go overseas, and we landed in France on July the 15th.
Okay.
And we spent the first night sleeping on grass between two army blankets, another girl and I. And that was because they didn't have anything set up, and the hospital wouldn't be set up for a couple of days. And this was right at the bombing of St. Lo. And we heard all of this going on, which we sort of wondered, wow, what's going here, you know?
Right.
And we were assigned to the town of St. Mary-Glise. And that's where we came in, on Utah Beach.
Right.
And the first night that we came into St. Mary-Glise and so forth, the Navy was there also and invited us out to dinner, which we did, but we didn't ask our chief nurse whether we could go or not. We just went. So anyway, we got on the ship and we had dinner and so forth, and on leaving from the LST to the LCI, we had to drop 6 or 7 feet.
Right.
And as I did, the boat separated.
Oh.
Oh, yes.
Uh-oh. And you went in?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Well, it was one of...
This was before dinner?
No, after dinner.
This was after dinner?
After
Okay,
dinner.
okay.
And this was after dinner. Anyway, I knew I was falling, and I thought, they have to have some sort of cables on this boat. You know, I knew that I'd seen all these boats with all this stuff on it. So I reached out and got a cable, but I was into the water up to my waist. And of course everyone was saying, where are you? Where are you? And I'm going, I said, I'm down here. And they said, well, come up here. And I said, no way. You come down and get me. I'm not coming up. So they finally got me up, and I was wet up to my waist. And of course we had wool trousers on and combat boots and all this, and you're going squish, squish, squish all the way. And so we went to an area near St. Mary-Glise and stayed in the cemetery overnight.
I see.
Not in. People don't realize, but churches, particularly in Europe, are very, very cold at night. I mean, they're built of stone and they keep this coldness. So we stayed in the cemetery, which was warmer. And so I was staying in the cemetery, and I was staying with the girl, Holovinsky, and we were sitting somewhere on the grass because we had nowhere to sleep. We were just sitting on the grass, and she, fortunately or unfortunately, struck a match to light the cigarette, and this MP came dashing over and yelling at her. And when he yelled at us, he found out that we were American people, and he said he hadn't talked to an American girl in weeks. So he sat down and talked to us and invited us for breakfast in the morning. So we had scrambled eggs and bacon and toast. You know, it was wonderful because usually we just had a GI portion, and so everyone said, "Well, don't you want your?" And we said, "No, we don't. We've already had breakfast." And they said, "How could you have had breakfast?" I said, "Well, we had breakfast." Anyway, we got on our bus, or I should say our GI truck.
Right.
And climbing up and down on that truck is something else. And
oh, excuse me, the 100th evac was attached to
Patton's Army.
Patton's Army.
Patton's Army, right.
Yeah.
To the 3rd?
Yes,
Yeah.
and we followed him wherever he went.
Right, right.
And so he was in that area for the time being and doing his armored march, as he called it. And so we got back to where we were supposed to be, and they set up the hospital. And we were there a number of weeks, and then we were moved somewhere else. We bypassed Paris and went to Belgium. And so we went around it, and we got situated, can't even think of the name of the town now, but we were in Belgium. My memory, Belgium.
That's okay.
I just don't remember the time being. But anyway, we got there and we established our hospital, and we were pretty well, evacuation hospital. After the first aid, we were the first hospital that people went to, and of course we had surgery and medical and psychiatric divisions. And the most that we ever admitted in one day was 1,000.
Wow. Oh
yeah. I mean, you don't realize this number until you're through with doing it. And our Colonel Kirkendall, who was in charge of the evacuation hospital, put us on an 8-hour schedule. He said nobody after 8 hours is doing his job.
Right.
He said 8 hours is as long as you can do it. And he said, I don't care what the other Army units do or anything else. He said, we are going to be on 8 hours, which was very good because actually at 8 hours you're tired.
Right.
And the other 4 hours you don't do what you should do.
Right.
So the rotating 8 hours turned out to be a good thing for us.
Yeah, yeah.
And so anyway, we established the hospital there and admitted patients, and finally we were in Belgium, and name of the town. It just escapes me.
That's okay. But you were setting up a...
Yeah, we set up our evacuation hospital there, and then on Christmas Day we moved into a public school building for the very simple reason, at the time being, they didn't have the space for the hospital. So we were in this public school building, which we used as a hospital, and we lived in tents, but the hospital itself was in the building.
Right.
And we were there through Christmas.
Right. Now, are we in 44 now?
44.
Okay. Was this during the bulge?
Just at the bulge.
Yeah, okay, right. Okay.
And of course, we were, I would say, 4 miles away from the Battle of the Bulge.
Right.
Fortunately, it didn't hurt us, but it made us think a lot about doing things.
Exactly. Yeah.
And from there we went to Luxembourg, and we were there for a while. And then when the war ended, or we knew the war was ending, we went to 20 miles outside of Berlin and established a hospital there. And we were strafed a number of times.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people think that a Red Cross in a hospital unit is safe, but it isn't. I mean, they strafed them just as much as anything else, because the Germans had used the Red Cross hospital as a safety thing. And people found out that when they went to these hospitals, that they opened fire. And so therefore, anything that had a Red Cross on was no longer a safe haven.
It became a target.
That's right. And so we decided that we would move on, and I think that well, we were in Luxembourg, I think, a couple of weeks, and then we moved, as I said, 20 miles outside of Berlin and established the hospital. There was no name to the town. It was on the highway going to Berlin, and that was the last place that we established our hospital.
Right.
And after that, the war was ended, and we were told that we could go home, or we could, I mean, all the men in our unit were sent home, and there were 5,000 women in one area. And we were there for 8 weeks waiting to go home. And you never met so many angry women in your life.
I'll bet.
I mean, here we were, all of us sitting there near Reims and wondering, what in the heck's going on? We're just sitting here. And so finally, we called somebody up at headquarters and had him come down, and he looked at us and he said, we were all home. We said, then what are we doing here? Because the 100th evac was home. Well, the women weren't home. All the men were.
Right.
And all the rest of the evacuation hospitals. And, you know, all the women, as I said, 8,000 women, still there. So they finally got us on a ship going home.
So they thought you were already home, right?
Yes.
Or they didn't know you were there?
No.
Yeah.
We were off. I mean, they checked us off. We were already home.
Well, good thing somebody called.
Oh, well, we went to headquarters.
Right. To say, hey, we haven't been taken home yet.
We said, what are we doing here?
Right. My goodness. Wow.
That was an experience with 8,000 women, believe me.
Yeah. 8,000 mad women.
Yeah, angry women.
Angry women.
Angry women.
With nothing to do because the war's over.
Yeah, what could you do? I mean,
Now, you were a triage nurse, right?
yes.
Which meant what? You were one of the first ones to see and evaluate. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or,
When the patients came in, you had to decide whether they were serious or they were minor or they could be kept for a while. And unfortunately, in triaging, particularly in the military, you try to get all the military persons back as fast as you can. So the triage really does not help a seriously ill or a seriously injured person. But we did the best that we could, and we got them into surgery as quickly as possible. I mean, I think we probably bent rules and made sure that the serious serious injured ones got a lot of attention. But a lot of the soldiers, of course, came in with minor injuries, and of course you'd say to them, I'm sorry, but we're just going to put a Band-Aid on and you're going to go back.
Yeah.
And you know, you sort of felt guilty in a way that you're sending these kids back where they're going to get injured again.
Right.
And it's not a good feeling.
No. No.
But you know that that's something you have to do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I get, well, obviously you saw a lot of things that you'll never forget.
Oh yes, definitely.
Did you have a lot of civilians come too?
Well, yes, we had children. We took care of the children, but other civilians, no. But the children we took care of.
Right.
I mean, stepping on bombs, you know, and so forth. And, oh, these poor kids. I mean, we really took care of them. But once we took care of them, we had to give them back to their parents.
Right.
Because we couldn't keep them.
Right.
And this sounds like you're patching a Band-Aid or something, but you're not. You're helping them very much, because what we gave them was antibiotics, which the parents could not get a hold of. And we would give the parents the antibiotics and tell them that this is what you do for your child.
Right.
To whoever spoke French and interpreted for the people that were taking care of the child.
Mm-hmm.
But we did not deny any child any care. We took care of the children
Right.
if they came in. This is something we didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the patients that you got, the military patients you got, were there, I mean, some victims of the bulge that
We had
came your
some,
way?
yes.
Uh-huh.
We had some that came in, but not.
Right.
I guess so. You just don't remember all
Yeah,
the people
right,
that came
right.
in. But
Right.
we did
But you
have.
stayed busy. I mean, there wasn't any slow days.
No, there
in
wasn't
there.
any slow days. The whole thing is when we moved
Mm-hmm.
the evacuation hospital from one area to the other, one half of it moved at one time,
Right.
and then the other half caught up with it after we set up the hospital.
I see. But you essentially followed the path of Patton and
Yes.
and his
His group.
You were his hospital, or for
Yeah,
his
we were
group.
actually
Right.
assigned to
How many
Third
patients
Army.
did you get a day?
Yeah.
the Third Army, and that was Patton.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. So you say 1,000 was a big day. What normally would you?
Probably
Would you-
about 300 to 400.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Did you know Patton? Did you meet him? Did you?
Well, I met Patton.
Yeah.
Don't ask me.
Was he everything that history was portrayed him as?
Yes, he was.
He was a rough old guy, huh?
He really was.
Uh-huh.
I know that he knew. I knew that he knew history. There's no ifs and ands about it because what he planned and so forth was what the Romans had done for years.
Right.
I mean, he was a terrific planner,
Right.
but he wasn't a very nice man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
It was his way or no way.
Uh-huh.
That was it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, it was interesting meeting him, but that's all I can say.
Yeah. Now you, I know. Remind me of the story of when you met Ed, and I know you met him when you were both over there serving, right?
Well, we met a week after D-Day.
Right. Uh-huh.
4 days.
4 days
4
after
days.
D-Day.
No,
Right.
Okay, and we were going down to Bournemouth, which we were because we were getting ready to go overseas.
Uh-huh.
And Ed and his group were celebrating D-Day because they had dropped all the paratroopers and everything else,
Right.
and they wanted to relax. And they had a dance, and they couldn't figure out how to have a dance without women.
Right.
And so they came and asked us if we wanted to go to the dance, and we said sure, something to break up the monotony of staying in a Quonset hut. And so we went to the dance. But we got to the dance, and all of us in the truck looked out, and we weren't sure we really wanted to go because these people had been drinking for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, we're not sure we really want to get out of here. But we decided we would. But I just barely got in the door when a paratrooper got a hold of me, and he wouldn't let me go. He, put his hands around, and here I was against a wall, and I couldn't get away from him. And he was telling me all about what happened to him, and I'm going, yes, I can understand, yes. And so finally I saw a chaplain, and I'm going, what was to the chaplain? So the chaplain got a hold of him and finally got
Right.
where he should be. But well, it was
Trooper you're talking about, those really a glider pilot.
the glider pilot.
They pulled the gliders in,
Yeah.
and they brought the pilots back to go again.
Yeah,
And he had just come back from,
and he was traumatized.
Right.
Hmm.
Right.
And so anyway, it's not that I didn't enjoy being there, but you're trapped. You can't go anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And so finally I got into the dance, and a friend of Ed's asked me to dance. And he started to dance with me, and what this character did more than anything else is he took hold of me and then slid across the floor. And so finally I went, somebody rescue me. And so,
You needed rescued
I
again.
thought she was waving to me, so I waved back.
so anyway, and I got to and I got to talking and so forth, and then finally we left. And as we left, Ed said, "Will you write to me?" And I said, "Me and 6 others." But I did write to him, and he wrote to me.
Yeah.
And we didn't meet again until we were in the States.
Right. Right. I remember you telling me that.
Hmm. But it was nice. It was a good correspondence because we felt very free to put down on paper what we felt like putting down. We weren't restrained,
Right.
which was good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
What are some of your other experiences away from the horror of the triage when you were there and going off into England? And I'm trying to remember. Did you tell me that you?
I went to Paris.
Yeah, you went to Paris. Did you meet up with some celebrities or something? Or
I sure did.
yeah, tell me. Remind me of that again.
Well, I met all the correspondents.
That's right. That's right. Now I remember now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason
Yeah.
that I did is that when I was in Brittany and so forth, I went to a cafe with a lieutenant, and we were sitting in this cafe, and there was a nice young man who came in, and he was the driver, and then whoever he was driving came in with him, which I didn't know at the time being, and we got to talking, and he was from Erie, Pennsylvania, and I thought, hey, that's next to Ashtabula. And so we got to talking because we knew, there were a lot of things we had in common. And I didn't think anything of it. And the next day, I got a call from Colonel Kirkendall saying there was someone who wanted to see me. I went to his tent, and here was Francis Chase, who was doing he was writing the history of engineering for the United States. And I didn't know who he was. I had no idea. Just, somebody that had that name, and that was it. But I found out that he was a well-known writer and had written books and so forth, and had written for the New Yorker for years. And so he's the one who introduced me to all the other correspondents, which was nice.
Right.
And I really enjoyed corresponding with him and having a good time, and we just enjoyed each other's company.
Who are some of the other ones that you met?
John Daly and Ernest Hemingway, who I did not like.
Right. I remember you telling me that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't think of the other ones that were there, but the whole group of correspondents that were there covering the war, I met them all.
Right.
So it was for somebody from a small town, this was pretty good.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I enjoyed it. It was I was footloose and fancy free, so why not enjoy it while the time being?
Right.
And I had a good time with them, and Francis introduced me to Paris, which I had never seen. And he showed me Paris, which, a lot of people just don't realize that there are things there. And he stayed at the, I'm trying to think of the hotel. Anyway, premier hotel that they had in Paris. And he was very nice about showing me different things that I would never have seen.
Right.
And so I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
And we had a good time. And then...
Your experience as a nurse, though, while obviously horrific experience is rewarding, though, also, right? You saved some lives.
Oh, yes. I'm pretty sure I did. Oh, yeah. I never thought I didn't.
Right.
Because if I thought it was a negative thing, I don't think I would have survived it.
Right.
No,
Right.
I thought that everything that I did was a positive thing, so I would help people more than anything else.
Right. Besides the medical part of it and just fixing them up and sending them to the right place and bandaging them up, the psychological healing had a whole lot to do with it also. Right.
And it's amazing, after the war, I heard from 3 or 4 people that I'd taken care of. Which was strange, but I had heard from them.
Right.
And they were doing fine.
Yeah.
So you know that it was a positive thing.
Did you get along with the doctors pretty well?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Of course, there's always some that you don't. No, but I did. I got along with most of them. Yeah. After all, I had experienced, my sister had married a doctor, my twin, and so therefore I was used to doctors and so forth.
Right. You knew their
idiosyncrasies.
And all that. Right. So you finish. They finally get you home after 8 weeks of forgetting about you. And they finally get you home, and you meet up with Ed again. And then tell me about your all's path. But when did y'all get married?
Well, we both got home.
Right.
And we wrote to each other
right.
at Christmas time. And then at spring break, I went up to Marquette University where Ed was.
Uh-huh.
And we decided that it was going to be a pretty serious thing. So I applied for work at the VA hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I worked. And Ed and I took a year to know each other before we got married. And he asked me, and I said, no. I said, I don't know you, and you don't know me. And I said, let's take a year.
Right.
So we waited a year and then got married.
1947, if
47.
47, if I'm getting this right.
Yeah.
So yeah, Christmas of 45 is when you got together in the spring of 46, waited a year, and got married in 47.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And then what? Then what'd you do?
Then what did we do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see.
You were living where then?
In Milwaukee.
In Milwaukee, okay.
Yeah. Ed finished his degree, and then he worked. He applied for work, and was hired by Steel Mill.
Sure. By TRW.
TRW.
Tommy.
So we moved back to Cleveland.
Right.
We moved back to Euclid.
Now, were you still nursing?
Yes.
Okay.
And I went to work for Deaconess Hospital.
Okay.
As OB/GYN. So I got lots of varied.
Yeah, right.
So we stayed there until see, when did you move?
Where, in Cleveland?
Yeah.
Well, we were in Cleveland for about 10 years.
Yeah.
I worked for TRW, then I worked for NASA,
Right.
and then NASA brought me here to Texas, Houston.
And in
Yolanda, why don't you tell them about some of the happier, like the trip you took across the Elbe River to meet.
oh yeah, the Russian party.
Meet the Russian party.
Okay, tell me that.
Well, the war was over, and the Russians invited a group from our hospital, because we were the nearest to them, across the Elbe River, to a Russian party, and everyone said, well, I don't think I really want to go, but 3 or 4 of us decided to go, and we had a very nice dinner, and of course they served vodka by the carload, and this Russian lieutenant that I was sitting, or captain that I was sitting with, said to me, they would say, Prost, you're supposed to drink, and I wouldn't drink, and he'd say, don't you? And I said, yes, but I don't drink vodka. And he said, you don't? And I said, no. And I said, does your wife? And he looked at me and said, no. And I said, well, I don't either. Anyway, quite a few of us went to this Russian party, and I will say that probably I was the only sober one out of the group. And I'm not joking. Anyway, we had a good time and so forth, and this Russian general that was there and so forth, he knew that I was not drunk. I mean, he'd tell it, and he'd say, you do not drink? I said, no, I do not drink. And so, anyway, we had a good time, and it was a congenial affair.
Right.
And then we got back in the boat to go back on the other side. But, you're wondering about these people that aren't quite whether they get in the boat or not.
Right.
But we got in and we got back safely.
Right.
But we had a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are good things to remember.
Right.
Those really are.
Yeah. And then there's the really sad things that you see, and particularly concentration camps. And these always stay with you.
Sure.
And if I ever, and I'm sorry, but every time I smell burnt something or other, it triggers the memories of all these burnt people that I saw, and stacks of them, and wood, and Ed and I went back and saw these concentration camps on a trip, and this woman looked at me and I said, this is all wrong. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I don't smell any burnt flesh. I don't see any stacked people there. And she said, well, I said, this is much too clean. I said, this is not a concentration camp. I said, it's too clean.
Right.
And that's what I remember more than anything else.
Yeah.
And then I remember people walking back to Estonia and Latvia that were part of the slaves for the Nazis that worked in the factories. And I remember these people, mile after mile, walking back home. They had no transportation. They walked home. And this was 300 to 400 miles.
Wow.
And you just saw miles and miles of these people walking home.
Right.
And that leaves an impression, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, and we couldn't pick them up for the very simple reason we weren't going the way they were going.
Exactly.
We were going the other way.
Mm-hmm.
But you just saw...
So when did you have occasion to witness the concentration camps? This was near war's end? I mean, 1945?
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
When...
I would say the shooting stopped, but
Mhm.
the armistice had not been signed yet.
Right. Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's when we did.
Mm-hmm.
And we particularly the Army liberated these camps. And
Right.
of course, we got patients from the camps.
I see. The ones that had survived.
Yes.
Right.
And we took care of them the best that we could.
Yeah.
And the thing that I remember most than anything else, which made such an impression, is that we also had American prisoners that were captured in Africa. Now this goes back.
Mm-hmm.
And this one man was liberated from a prisoner of war camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I took care of him, and he said it was just wonderful to hear an American woman's voice and so forth. And he died.
Mm.
And I mean, you're going, all this time, and the shock was too much. But he just died.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, this is terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, he lived through everything, and then this is it.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
And those are things that you remember more than
Sure.
anything else. And, of course, we had lots of prisoners of war that were liberated.
Right.
And they were in sad, sad condition.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So...
But they're pictures in your mind that you'll never forget.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So y'all came to Texas in what, mid-50s?
No, we came to Texas in 1970,
Oh, in 70. Okay. Okay.
and we lived in El Lago, which is part of Houston.
Right.
I worked at the NASA Space
Right.
Center there,
Right. I recall.
and we were there for 2 years, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Not long.
Because I came here in May of 1973 when I started work for A&M.
Mm-hmm. And y'all both worked at A&M, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me what you did again.
Experimental surgery and research
Okay.
on animals.
On that, over at the vet school.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Loved it.
Yeah.
Well, I did. I mean, you know, I I take issue with people that say, well, you do these experiments on animals and you're hurting them. And I'm going, we took such good care of these animals, you don't even know what you're talking about.
Uh-huh.
But we experimented on catheters for heart. And everybody doesn't realize that they had to figure out how big the balloon should be, how big the catheter should be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, who else can you do? As I tell these people, okay, fine, do you want to be the first one? You know?
Right.
So I enjoyed it thoroughly. I really had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
I couldn't have had a better time.
How long were you over there?
10 years.
10 years.
Well, when I applied for the job, Dr. McCready asked me how long I was going to be there, and I said 10 years. And he looked at me, and he said, 10 years? And I said, yes, I will be here 10 years, and that's it.
Uh-huh.
Well, I was 57 when I applied for the job, which I didn't think I'd get because of my age.
Right.
And he did hire me.
Uh-huh.
And I left when I was 67.
I'll be darned.
Mm-hmm. And he said, you meant what you said. And I said, Dr. McCready, you should know that that's what I mean.
That's right. That's been your way for a long, long time.
Right.
Mean what you say.
Mm-hmm.
What a fact! I'm so glad that I thought of this to come and talk to you again, and I look forward to doing the show. I really do. This is going to be good because I've learned some more things about you that I didn't get the first time around. Because hopefully this will pave the way for me to have more nurses and women on.
Good.
And because I know that we have a lot in the Brazos Valley that did serve.
Yes, you do.
And I know a lot that served in air that were pilots and folks like that. So So I look forward to it. I know I got some photographs from y'all last time. Do you have any pictures or anything like that? If you don't, that's okay. Do you have any pictures from back then? Any pictures of whether it's just a mugshot or whatever you've got? I'd like to see what you got.
We're going to celebrate our 60th wedding anniversary, 27th of August.
27th of August. Yeah. Yeah, I guess that. Yeah, right. 1947. Yeah. 60 years. How about that? How wonderful.
Being a triage nurse, you have to define whether or not this person is acutely ill, or whether he needs surgery immediately, or whether he can go back to combat. And what you do as a triage nurse, the people that can go back to combat are treated first.
Right. Right. Which
is very difficult.
Which is very difficult sometimes, because sometimes you had to treat the less severely wounded because they could get on their feet quicker and go back to combat, and sometimes the more severely wounded had to wait.
And you tried to save as many seriously wounded as you possibly could.
Right.
But your hands were tied in many ways because you only had so much space in a tent, and you only had 2 people attending these people.
Right.
And that probably was about for 60 people. And sometimes you couldn't do everything that you really wanted to do.
Right.
I mean, you did the best that you could, and you tried as hard as you could. After the war was over, of course, the liberation of the concentration camps, we took care of the ones that were there. But what I remember more than anything else, and it still bothers me, is that the smell of burnt flesh. And when I smell burnt meat and so forth, it triggers that memory. And you see these people, and when you think that you've got a room 8 by 10 stacked with bodies, I mean, you don't forget this.
No.
And you see these people that hung on and hung on, finally to be liberated.